On May 5th, 2009, the lives of a family in a small town near St. Louis are shattered. Husband and father Chris Coleman's routine trip to the gym unraveled into a nightmare. Unable to reach his wife Sheri, upon returning home, Chris's world collapsed when he received the chilling news from his neighbor and a detective that his wife and 2 young sons were dead. But what unfolded next was far more than a tragic story of loss. Threatening notes, clandestine affairs, deception, infidelity, and ultimately murder, all under the unlikely backdrop of televangelism. This is the story of Chris Coleman, the writing on the wall. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potterf. Welcome to Hitch to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends from Portugal. Yep. Bem-vindo.
Never been to Portugal, would love to go.
I know.
Put it on the list, honey.
Beautiful country.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Then you can like, rate, and review the podcast so others who are just like you, who like true crime, can find us.
Yes. And
if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below.
Please do.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitch to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And if you want true crime with us every single day of the week, please join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. Just go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a couple questions, you're in, go join.
True crime all day.
All day, all the time. I like to post photos and other information in there as well. It's a good, supportive group of true crime people who even show pictures of their new babies.
Yes.
So congratulations.
Yeah.
We also now have a Buy Me a Coffee link. If you want to send Rob out there some coffee.
Look at that.
Drinks at every episode.
Yep.
You can find that link in our show notes. We appreciate all your messages, your emails. Thank you to each and every one of you for showing up every single week. You're the reason we're here.
Yep.
Before we get started on this case, this one gets me a lot.
Really?
Well, it's just, how does a man murder his 2 small children? You know, that's just, it's a lot.
Yep.
It's a lot. So be forewarned, children are dying in this episode today. If you can't handle that, you might want to tap out now.
Let me cover Scotty's ears.
Cover Scotty's ears. Before we get started, let me thank some sources. St. Louis Magazine, True Crime Daily, PraisePhilly.com, 48 Hours, Investigation Discovery, the Tampa Bay Times, the Southern Illinoisan, CBS News, Fox 2 News, the Republic Times, the Matin Journal Gazette, the People vs. Coleman Case Law, and JoyceMeyer.org.
All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Chris Coleman is born on March 20th, 1977, to Connie and Ron Coleman. I have shoes older than Chris, I think. Just had to say it.
I definitely do.
His parents are both evangelical ministers. And as a young boy, he grew up in a non-denominational church with his brothers, Brad and Keith, and he would actually speak in tongues, or what is known as glossolalia. I know I've said that before. I think I just like saying the word glossolalia. But that's when you speak in tongues and you're filled with the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
Growing up, he and his family based all their decisions on Scripture, strictly Scripture. Ron, Chris's dad, preached what is called clear teaching from the Bible, which says, whatever the Bible says, that's what you do.
By the
Literally,
book.
by the book.
Yep.
Chris was the quietest and most reserved of the 3 boys, and I read where his mother said the worst curse word that Chris ever said in front of her was Piss, and she spelled it out.
You cock-a-doodie!
Okay.
His mom and I would probably not get along because Chris gets out the potty mouth every now and then.
Well.
Watch the potty mouth, honey.
Chris liked sports growing up. He liked to play basketball and baseball. He ran track. He was really known as a team player. But when it came to things like hunting, he wouldn't do it with his father because he didn't like killing the animals.
I get that. I mean, I grew up out in the country, and I actually hunted when I was younger, but and I don't have anything against hunting. In fact, I'm kind of jealous of guys that like to go out and hunt, but I just can't kill animals. I can't do it.
He says he can't.
Oh.
I'm rolling my eyes.
Oh.
When Chris graduates, he doesn't go to college. He enlists in the United States Marine Corps. And Chris's father has said that he thinks Chris would have made the service his career. Except when Bill Clinton entertained Monica in the Oval Office, that turned him against serving his country.
Okay.
To which I say, whatever, dude.
Yeah, he wasn't very serious about it then.
But while Chris was a Marine, he joined the K-9 unit, and that led him to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
All right.
Sheri Ann Weiss was born on July 3rd, 1977, to Donald and Angela Weiss in Berwyn, Cook County, Illinois, just west of Chicago. Sheri moves to Pinellas County, Tampa, Florida, in the mid-1980s when she's like 9 years old, where she attends Mildred Helms Elementary and Largo Middle and Largo High School.
Okay.
And this is where she meets her best friend, Tara Lentz. Sheri played softball in high school, and then after graduation in 1995, she joined the military. She joined the Air Force and was an MP, military police, and would eventually serve as a military K-9 officer at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas.
I feel a meeting coming up.
And this is where Sheri Weiss meets Chris Coleman in 1997.
All right.
It was love at first sight.
Not at first bite.
Not at first bite. At first sight.
The K-9 unit. Sorry.
At the K. Oh, I'm just now getting it.
Ba-dum-bum.
Put one over on me today, honey.
Oh, well.
Love at first sight, and within 3 months of meeting, they were pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Now, if Chris's parents said that he was disappointed in President Clinton, how must they have felt about Chris and his girlfriend of 3 months?
Yeah.
Not only sleeping together, but now they're having a baby.
Right.
And don't email me. I say live your life. I don't care.
Right.
But his parents, who teach straight from the Bible, literally could not have been happy about that.
Right. We're talking about this story.
Yes. I say live your life.
Right.
Chris took his new love home to meet his parents in early August of 1997. They lived just outside of St. Louis. Chris is just 22 years old, and Sheri is 21. And Chris introduced Sheri as a friend from Chicago.
Okay.
And Chris's parents thought she was, quote, a worldly little girl with short shorts and a tattoo on her leg, end quote. Which seems to me like church lady speak for we didn't like her.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, isn't that special?
We didn't like her. She was not the person they thought Chris would end up with. He told his parents he was going to take Sheri home. And then he just never came back. He just never went back to his parents' house.
Okay.
And the next morning he called to say, quote, we got married, end quote.
Hello.
Yeah. So to me, that says he's afraid of his parents, wasn't going to tell them what was really going on.
Right.
But they tied the knot on August 8th, 1997. Chris's dad has said that Chris realized right away that the marriage wasn't godly. And of course, his parents would later find out that Sheri was pregnant. So Sheri's a fun girl. She's playful. She liked to have a good time. But after they got married, she was a born-again Christian. And then she became a mother.
Okay.
Garrett Dominic Eugene Coleman was born on April 30th, 1998 at Andrews U.S. Air Force Base outside of Washington, D.C. And as Garrett grows up, he will be described as a polite, well-mannered boy who loved playing sports, especially football. He
Okay.
played pee-wee football.
There you go.
I used to have a pee-wee football player. Their pads and their helmets are bigger than they are, but it is just the best. I loved it. I loved every minute of sitting out in the rain
Yep.
and watching my son play pee-wee football.
Yep.
When Chris took a new job in Columbia, Illinois, he takes a job working for a woman that both of his parents have known for years. It's televangelist Joyce Meyer.
Oh, wow.
Joyce had known Chris since he was a little boy because of his parents, and it makes sense that his mom and dad helped him to get this job. Joyce Meyer would take these trips, like 13 conferences and 4 or 5 trips a year internationally.
Mm-hmm.
She had tons of speaking engagements, and Chris would make sure that things were safe for Joyce in the crowds. He becomes part of her security team.
Gotcha.
And sometimes he would go ahead of the group to make sure it was safe. Sometimes he traveled with Joyce and the team. And according to Joyce herself, he started just in security and worked his way up to head of security and was one of her main bodyguards, if not her main bodyguard.
All right.
And just for reference, Joyce Meyer Ministries is a Christian nonprofit organization founded by Joyce Meyer and her husband Dave in 1987,
Okay.
where 86 cents of every dollar goes to outreach programs for people in need. Joyce travels a lot. There are a lot of people who want to get close to Joyce because they love her when she's on tour and she's preaching.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people who want to get close to Joyce because they don't love her. So it doesn't matter whether she's being, praised or stalked.
Right.
She has to be watched over.
Sure.
And that's what the security team was in charge of, keeping her safe.
Right.
And Chris would actually vet any letter or email or threat to Joyce because
Gotcha.
she gets them all the time, apparently.
Sure.
2 years after moving to Columbia, they have baby number 2, little Gavin Christopher Coleman, on May 5th, 2000. Gavin will later be described as an avid baseball fan and a, quote, bona fide firecracker who was very animated and hilarious. Apparently, Gavin was very much like his mother, a free spirit.
Gotcha.
Chris and Sheri were very involved in their 2 sons' lives, mostly Sheri because Chris's job required him to travel all the time with Joyce.
Right.
But they took family vacations, and Sheri and the boys were very involved in their church, Destiny Church in St. Louis. Sheri worked closely there. She organized trivia night fundraisers. She single-handedly hosted lots of show up and buy something parties. She went all out celebrating holidays with the kids. She paid to have a friend's entire kitchen redone. She loved SpongeBob SquarePants, MASH reruns, and the New Kids on the Block. Me too, Sheri. Both boys played Pee-wee football for the Blue Jay football team, and they attended Parkview Elementary School in Columbia, Illinois.
Okay.
Now, the family of 4 would take trips to Florida, to Disney, and while they are there, they would see Sheri's BFF from high school, Tara Lentz. Tara was single. She worked as a hostess at a gentleman's club and then a cocktail waitress at the Derby Lane Dog Track in St. Petersburg, Florida. Have you ever been to a dog track?
I have not.
I've only been once. I didn't realize, the whole greyhound
Right.
thing,
Yep.
how there are greyhound rescues and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have gone.
Right.
The most intriguing thing to me was the guy with the voice who would go, "Here comes the bunny."
Look out, folks, here comes the bunny.
And the fake rabbit
Yeah.
comes flying out and
Yeah.
then the dogs go after it. Yeah. But even though this little family of 4 is by all accounts the perfect all-American family, Chris's parents really weren't on board with Sheri. They never had been. And according to one of Sheri's friends, Chris had to bribe his wife to go see his parents in Illinois, in Chester, Illinois.
That's not good.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Chris used to promise to take Sheri to her favorite restaurant, the Melting Pot, if she would go to Chester with him for a family visit.
I think the last time I was at a melting pot was in 1984.
In 1997?
That was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
According to what Sheri told her friends, his parents never accepted her.
That had to be hard. It's one thing when you've got a great relationship with your in-laws. It's a horrible thing when you've got a not good relationship with your in-laws.
Yeah, that would have to be hard.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to keep the kids away from the grandparents, but at the same time, if they don't like you, it's got to be uncomfortable.
And if you dread going, come on. Yeah.
Money was another point of contention. Chris liked making it and living the life that it bought, and Sheri liked spending it and giving it away. She splurged at the mall. She planned a mission trip to a leper colony. Wow. She bought food and blankets for the homeless. Then she drove around St. Louis handing them out. But according to one of Sheri's friends, Vanessa Rigorex, who is her neighbor, Chris once told her to stop with the taking care of all the needy people, saying, quote, "Oh, chill out, you holy roller," end quote.
Whoa.
And then he'd turn it around and tell everybody, quote, "She used to be wild and crazy," end quote.
Wow.
She was a bit of a wild card. Sheri was a lot like her friend Tara, free-spirited and fun-loving. But now she's a mom, and a mom who was taking care of the boys mostly by herself because Chris was gone with Joyce on tours and book signings and conventions. And she's a born-again Christian, which is what apparently he wanted.
Right.
And she's very involved in the church and is very giving of her time and of herself. But now he doesn't like it. Between the two of them, Chris was the disciplinarian. He would drop whatever he was doing to play ball with the boys, but his friends and neighbors said that he rarely hugged or kissed the boys and Sheri.
Sounds like he was a bit of a control freak.
I think he was a control freak for sure, but that's something that you're taught as a child,
right?
And I don't know if that is something that he didn't see or didn't have in his own life growing up. Mm-hmm. But he's not affectionate toward his wife or his children.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a great upbringing.
No. But apparently he was outwardly supportive as a coach and when he'd coach the boys' teams. And even though Chris seemed cold to those on the outside, Gavin and Garrett thought that their dad hung the moon. They adored their father. And I saw where they even put a calendar on the fridge in their house when Chris was gone for work so they could mark off the days until their dad would be home again. And he was gone a lot. And Sheri actually told a friend in that year he would be gone 260 days or more.
Right.
Out of the 365. So he's only home 100.
That's a lot.
When he was home, he would hang out with his neighbor, Chris Butler, about once a month. And while Chris Coleman is hanging out with Chris Butler, I'm going to use both their first and last name so you don't get the Chris's confused.
All right.
He's complaining a lot. Chris was Vanessa Rigorex's fiance, and they just lived 4 houses down the street in a cul-de-sac. And Chris Coleman confided in Chris Butler about his marital problems and his dissatisfaction with his job working for televangelist Joyce Meyer. Chris complained about his, quote, shotgun marriage, end quote.
Wow.
And said he worked 80 and 90 hours a week, quote, protecting some millionaire lady I don't even like while my old lady gets to sit in my home in this nice big house, end quote.
Wow.
Chris Coleman told Chris Butler he was deep in credit card debt, despite making $100,000 a year. And he complained that his wife, Sheri, had put $1,000 on his credit card from shopping just recently. Chris Coleman tells Chris Butler that he was interested in starting his own business, like a cleaning company or a gym or a security company, because he was so unhappy with the travel demands of his job. Now, this guy's going to be all over the place, so stay with me on this.
All right.
Chris Coleman said, quote, I'm making $100,000 a year and I've got to drive around in a clunker. We're so far in credit card debt, end quote. Chris wasn't happy. He was always talking about not wanting to be with Sheri, but not knowing what to do. Chris told Chris Butler that if he got divorced, he would lose his job with Joyce Meyer.
Wow.
But at the same time, he'd say that the Meyer family's 24/7 demands were getting on his nerves. And with all the travel, he didn't get enough time to spend with his kids. So did he want to keep his job or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're unhappy, then move on.
Yeah. Well, according to Sheri, Chris actually looked up to Joyce. She even tells the youth pastor at Destiny Church, his name is Larry Bridges, that, quote, Chris is emotionally attracted to Joyce, end quote.
What does that mean?
Like he's a little bit in love with her. I mean, emotionally attracted means,
Yeah.
You've got feelings.
Okay.
So Chris is all over the board.
Yeah.
I mean, he's telling his friends, I don't like my wife. Like, I had this shotgun wedding. She spends too much money.
Yeah.
But I can't get divorced because I'll lose my job. And I don't like this lady anyway. And at the same time, his wife is saying Chris is emotionally attracted to Joyce.
Yeah.
So he's all over the board.
Yeah, he's telling one person one thing and her another. And
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Chris would say, I can't believe that people who only make $50,000 a year would give 10 grand to Joyce Meyer Ministries. And then he would turn around and defend Joyce and say, well, she makes all of her money from her books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he liked the lifestyle that Joyce and her husband afforded him.
Right.
Because according to his buddy, Chris Butler, Chris Coleman would be wearing like a new pair of jeans, an expensive pair of jeans, and then say, quote, oh, Joyce bought these for me, end quote. Because he has to go with her everywhere when they travel, and if she goes shopping, she might buy him something too.
Sure.
And even at one point he said, quote, I guess I'm pretty close to Joyce because I know her bra and panty size, end quote.
Man.
Now, as a woman, this is exactly the kind of man
Yep.
you would not want working for you.
You think?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, he's a creep.
Yeah.
In late October of 2008, Chris is set to go to Tampa, Florida with Joyce. So Sheri gets in touch with her BFF in Florida, Tara Lentz, to see, hey, is it okay if he calls you and you guys meet up? And she says yes. And they do meet up early November.
Okay.
And this is the beginning of the end. Tara and Chris have started a torrid love affair.
This can't be good.
Now, in every single source I could find, this relationship says that these two got together in November of 2008, but I think it was earlier, maybe in October, maybe. We'll come back to that, okay?
All right.
When Chris Coleman returns from this trip on November 8th, 2008, the title of the Coleman home at 2854 Robert Drive is modified.
Really?
Chris takes Sheri's name off the deed of their home,
Whoa.
leaving him as the sole owner.
Wow.
Now, back on the job for Joyce Meyer on November 14th, 2008, 6 days after he changes the deed on their family home, a suspicious email arrives at Chris's work email address. It's from destroychris@gmail.com. The subject line read, F*** Chris's family. They are dead. End
Whoa.
quote.
Jeez.
The message was, tell Joyce to stop preaching the bullshit or Chris's family will die. I will kill his wife and kids. End quote.
Okay. I can kind of see this one coming down the road.
Now, the next day, November 15th, another email arrives. You all. Tell that bitch Joyce to give my money back. Until then, everyone will die, starting with Chris's wife and kids. I know his schedule.
Wow.
So at this point, Chris is preparing to go out of the country with Joyce. And they're thinking, this person who's threatening them knows Chris's schedule.
Right.
And Chris tells Sheri about the emails that they aren't about Joyce, but about her and the two boys.
So Chris knows Chris's schedule.
You're very perceptive, honey.
This one does. I don't have to be a Mensa candidate to look at this one.
Well, you might be surprised. You might
Really?
be surprised.
All right. All right.
The following Monday, November 17th, Chris goes to the local police with these emails. He's concerned about his family and he wants extra presence around the house. He wants an extra patrol, especially when he's gone. For anybody who doesn't know this, if you've had suspicious activity, you can call the police and say, hey, we're going out of town for 2 weeks. Do you just mind to have somebody patrol down my street? And they'll do it. They will do it.
Right.
As long as they're not in the middle of something else, they
Sure.
will do it.
Right.
But he wants this extra police patrol while he's gone. But in the same time frame, he starts showing up at his friends' homes all upset and talking about how Sheri's spending too much money. He's like banging his fists on the kitchen counters and saying, quote, "I'm going to divorce her," end quote. He tells a friend that he's going to wait until after the holidays before he tells her, "I'm out.
Yeah.
I want a divorce." But he must have, at the very least, alluded to the fact that he wanted a divorce to Sheri, because on December 8th, Sheri texted the youth pastor at their church, who was also her friend, Larry Bridges, saying, quote, "Things just got way worse with Chris. I'm tired of hiding it. I think I know what's going on with Chris, and I'm so disgusted, I don't even know where to go with it. I'm not giving up on my marriage. I love Chris way too much. This seems like a horrible dream," end quote.
Wow.
Sheri called her in-laws, which really surprised me because I wonder how that conversation went. She also called her friends, and she confided in pastors at their church, but she only gave each of these people a little bit of information, but not the whole story. And finally, she shares with an assistant youth pastor at their church, her name is Jessica Wade, that Chris is in fact having an affair. She pulls up Facebook and asks Jessica, quote, "You want to see the woman my husband's having an affair with?" end quote.
Wow.
Sheri is devastated. She's hurt. She's bitter about the whole thing. But they have these two children, and it's Christmas time. So Christmas goes on, and it's pretty quiet around the Coleman house. There weren't any more emails or letters, but Sheri is confiding in more and more people, telling her friend Kathy LaPlante that Chris was tired of her keeping him from God's destiny for his life.
Okay. Well, all right.
It's all Sheri's fault that Chris is being kept from God's destiny for his life.
Wow.
That just irks me.
Yeah.
Sheri told several friends that Chris had said, quote, "She and the kids were in the way," end quote.
Good grief.
And while Sheri is telling her closest friends about Chris's affair, Chris is off buying Tara a promise ring for Christmas.
Jeez.
Sheri gets in touch with Joyce Meyer's son, Daniel, who she's friends with as well, to say that she and Chris were having issues. And when this gets around to Joyce, she confronts Chris with this. And he told her that Sheri was too controlling and that he couldn't do anything right. And at Joyce's suggestion, Chris and Sheri go to
Marriage counseling.
marriage counseling. She sends him to marriage counseling.
Right.
Now, by the time January 2009 rolls around, Sheri confides in her girlfriend, Christine Chiancata, that Chris had had sex with her, which was a rare thing. And after, he warned her not to think that that meant that he loved her. Can you believe that?
What a guy. What a guy.
While in bed, he told Sheri to, quote, "Shut up and turn over," end quote.
He was.
Sheri tells Christine that Chris wasn't very affectionate toward her and that she would, quote, "take whatever I can get," end quote, which is so sad to me.
Yeah.
Another instance when Chris and Sheri discussed their sex life was with friends Vanessa Rigorex and her fiancé, Chris. Chris Coleman tells the two of them that he couldn't, quote, "tell you the last time me and her did that. What about you two?" end quote.
Wow.
And when Vanessa explains that they had a very healthy and affectionate sex life, she then leaves the room and comes back with some, quote, goodies, telling Chris and Sheri to go home. She would keep the boys for them so they could have some alone time.
Okay.
And the next morning, Sheri calls Vanessa asking where the goodies came from and where she could get some.
Right.
Get some more of that.
Yeah.
Also in January of 2009, a letter arrives in the mailbox. Now, the emails have turned into somebody leaving notes in their mailbox. And this signals that whoever is sending these threatening messages now knows where the Colemans live.
Right.
Now, the first one says, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family." Publicly and opportunities are both misspelled. 2 L's in publicly and a U in place of the O in the middle of the word opportunities. That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh.
Yep. I'm going to say it now. Spelling matters.
Okay. It always does.
It does.
Yep.
But it matters even more in this case. By the next month, February 2009, Sheri is genuinely afraid. And Chris puts up a security system with cameras in front of his house. He's a security guard, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Why is he waiting until now? If you got threatening emails, how fast would the security tighten in our home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd have electric fences up.
Well, we do have Scotty the guard dog on top of everything else.
True.
So.
That's true.
But these cameras hook up to a system that's in their basement office, and the footage is saved to a digital video recorder. Meanwhile, Chris is out traveling with Joyce Meyer. He's gone to Phoenix. He's gone to Hawaii. And both times he's flying his new lover and Sheri's best friend from high school, Tara, in to be with him. And there were more trips. These two are taking tons of photos of themselves kissing. And when they're apart, they're sexting, sending photos and videos, and making sex tapes.
Wow.
He's writing down Tara's measurements, her height, her eye color, her jean size, her bra and panty size. He's keeping a list of her favorite perfumes and flowers, and even wrote down the birthday of Tara's dog, whose name is Gizmo.
Wow.
But Chris and Sheri keep going to counseling, and according to Sheri, and from the outside, it looks like things are getting better. But Sheri would confide to her friends that Chris would be sweet during counseling, and then when they got home, he would be mean to her again.
Really?
She told her friends while crying that Chris wanted a divorce, and he would fight with her and say hurtful things like, "I never loved you." But Sheri wasn't willing to let her marriage go. She wanted to fight for it. She has a whole family she's fighting for.
Sure.
But there was always hell to pay for the counseling when they got home. So Chris is going to counseling, but for the sake of appearance.
Right.
He was going to this marriage counseling because Joyce made him go to marriage counseling.
He's just putting on an act to keep
It's
his
a total show. Total
his gig.
show.
Yeah.
Sheri's not going to give him this divorce. No way, no how. She was in it till death do us part. She told her friend Kathy LaPlante on February 9th that if anything ever happened to her, quote, Chris did it, end quote.
Wow.
Which tells me that he was being violent and threatening her.
Yeah.
Why else would she say that?
Sure.
We're going to find out a little bit more about that later.
All right.
April 27th, 2009, another letter shows up in the mailbox. Quote, "This is your last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to come true," end quote.
I know this isn't funny, but it's just the leading up to this. This is your last chance. You can't do this again. You better not let this happen.
Yeah.
This is your last chance. I mean, come on.
Well, if spelling matters, so does intelligence. That's all I'll say.
All right.
I'm not a smart man.
Chris says that he's looked through the surveillance footage and that he sees a hooded person putting the letter in the mailbox. Chris saw it.
Okay.
But according to him, he didn't have a way to save it. He tells police about it on April 28th, the next day, but he has zero evidence of this so-called hooded person.
Wow.
Now, it just so happens that Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow of the Columbia, Illinois Police Department lives across the street from the Colemans. Now, they didn't know each other very well, but when Justin sees that these letters they're looking at the police station are being put in a mailbox across the street from him, he contacts Chris himself to say, "Look, I know you travel a lot. My house is just across the street. So here's my cell number, and that way, if you or your family needs anything, I can be there faster than a squad car," sort of thing.
Right.
And then the detective does what? What do you think he does at his own house?
Puts a camera up.
He puts up his own surveillance camera. If there's somebody threatening in the neighborhood, even if they're threatening the neighbors across the street, I'm going to protect my family.
Yeah, of course.
He actually mounts it in the bedroom of his little boy. It was a camera that was pointed out into the street, and you could see in full view Chris Coleman's house and his mailbox.
Okay.
May 4th, 2009, Chris is home and not traveling with Joyce. Gavin and Garrett are playing at Vanessa Rigorex's home. The next day, on May 5th, was actually Vanessa's son, Brandon. It was his 9th birthday,
Okay.
the same age as Gavin. Garrett, the older of the two Coleman boys, asks Vanessa, hey, can we sleep over and celebrate Brandon's birthday?
Mm-hmm.
And Vanessa says, absolutely. Run home, tell your mom and dad to pack your stuff, clothes and bags for school tomorrow. Come back here and we'll have a little pre-birthday birthday.
Right.
So Garrett runs home. They just live 4 houses away on the cul-de-sac. And then he comes back with his shoulders all slumped down and he said, quote, my dad says tonight is not a good night. We have to be home by 8:30, end quote.
Okay.
And Vanessa is shocked by this. And she tells Garrett, it's okay, you can stay on Saturday night, it's fine. And she sends the boys home for the night. It was the last time anyone would ever see Garrett or Gavin alive again.
Oh, no.
Because what Sheri and the boys don't know is that Chris's girlfriend, Tara Lentz, has given him a deadline. Leave Sheri by May 4th or it's over.
Wow.
That night, around 3 a.m. on May 5th, although he denies it to this day, Chris Coleman strangled his wife, Sheri, and their 2 young sons, Garrett and Gavin, in their beds. He murders them all. Then he spray paints vile things on the walls of the home to make it look like a home invasion and a murder. Now, I want to stop you there and tell you something, or remind you, if you don't know,
Okay.
it takes between 4 and 5 minutes of constant pressure to strangle someone, to kill them.
Wow.
And Chris has done this to Sheri and to his 2 young boys.
Man.
Now, Sheri fought him off. She scratched him. He punched her in the face. At 5:34 a.m., he's murdered his family, he has set up his crime scene, and he leaves for the gym.
Jeez.
1 hour later, at 6:42, Chris calls the detective who lives across the street from him. Detective Justin Barlow had just fallen back asleep after being up with their new 6-month-old baby.
Yeah.
Chris says, quote, my wife's not answering the phone. I need you to check on her and the kids. I'm on the JB Bridge. I'll be there in about 5 minutes, end quote. So Detective Barlow throws on clothes. He calls his dispatcher at the Columbia Police Department. He grabs his service weapon, cuffs, and a radio. He's on the Coleman's front porch when Officer Jason Donjon pulls up.
Okay.
And Justin tells his fellow officer, Jason, that nobody's answering calls inside the house. And Jason heads to the back of the house, and 1 minute later, he radios Detective Barlow and says, quote, you better come back here. There's a window open, and the screen is out, end quote. These 2 radio for backup. They climb through the window. They clear the basement, guns drawn. They slowly climb the steps, Jason going first because he's in uniform.
Right.
And in the air, they can smell paint fumes. And when they reach the first floor, they see the writing sprayed in bright red, bright candy apple red, across the kitchen breakfast area. It says, punished. I am always watching.
Wow.
And up the staircase, it says, you have paid, the letter U. At 6:56 a.m., 13 minutes after he called from the Jefferson Barracks Bridge, Chris pulls into the driveway just as another police officer shows up, Officer Steve Patton. The officers ask Chris to wait outside. You wait out here. And Jason keeps his gun pointed up the next set of stairs where the spray paint messages lead.
Right.
And they don't know what's up there or who is up there.
Right.
They go up single file. One officer goes toward the master bedroom, and Detective Barlow goes the other way and into one of the boys' rooms. Little Garrett is in bed, half covered, looking like he's sleeping, except his skin is gray and mottled, his limbs are rigid, and he has ligature marks around his neck.
Oh, man.
Detective Barlow hears the other officer call out that he has found Sheri. She's naked across the bed. She also has ligature marks around her neck, and she has a black eye. Detective Steve Patton finds Gavin dead in his bed, and when Detective Barlow moves into that doorway and sees little Gavin dead, he says that he really had to focus hard to hold it together. Because remember, he's got kids who just live across the street.
Sure.
But not only has little Gavin been strangled, his bed sheets have spray paint across them, and there's paint even on his tiny little body.
Oh, my gosh. What a monster.
Detective Steve Patton tells the others the husband outside might be our guy, so, quote, limit what you tell him, end quote.
Yeah.
When they go back downstairs, Chris is at the door, and they stop him and they tell him, wait outside, you just wait outside. And this is when Detective Justin Barlow, his neighbor, tells him, quote, they didn't make it, Chris. They didn't make it, end quote. Now, Chris Coleman doesn't protest. He doesn't try to get into the house to see his wife and 2 sons for himself. He doesn't need proof.
Right.
And the police were prepared to have to hold this big private bodyguard who's just come from the gym,
Right.
back. They thought, we're going to have to hold this guy back. He's going to want to get in this house and get to his family.
Sure.
But they didn't have to. Chris just sits on the ground and sobs. And then he calls his father. Chief Joe Edwards of the Columbia Police Department sits next to Chris while the police chaplain, the Reverend Jonathan Peters, tells him that his family has been murdered. And the Reverend doesn't say how his family has been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris doesn't ask.
Really?
Now, if someone in your family had
Yeah.
even been hurt,
Yeah.
what happened?
Right.
What happened to them?
Right.
And his family is dead, and he's not even asking, what did they do to them?
Right.
Chief Edwards suggests that Reverend Peters sit with Chris in the back of an ambulance because the press is starting to arrive. Chris's father, the Reverend Ron Coleman, pulls up into somebody's lawn, and he just leaves his keys in the ignition. He ducks underneath the crime scene tape to get to his son, and soon after, Joyce Meyer arrives. Now, I think the chief of police and the chaplain were there, not just because this is a small town and this is a full family being murdered in their home.
Right.
This is a high-profile case.
Sure.
He works for Joyce Meyer.
Absolutely.
Now, while Chris is sitting in the ambulance, the chief of police, Joe Edwards, is with him, and he witnesses Chris looking down at his arms and, seeing these big red scratches.
Right.
And Chris then says, quote, how did that get there? End quote.
I don't think Chris thought this through.
A few moments later, he starts banging his fists on a gurney inside the ambulance. Chief Edwards wants the best of the best on this case. He knows it's going to be high profile because of Joyce Meyer. He's not taking any chances. He calls in the major case squad of Greater St. Louis, and they take Chris to the Columbia Police Department, where his neighbor and the guy who was just on the scene first, Detective Justin Barlow,
Right.
and Detective Dave Bivens of the Illinois State Police Department, are going to interview him.
Okay.
Now, there's a video of this interrogation online. I will link it in the show notes.
Okay.
Chris is wearing a t-shirt, the sleeves are cut out, gym shorts, and he tells them that he's cold.
So he's got a wife beater on.
Well, he's got a t-shirt that he's ripped the arms off of because he's been to the gym. He's
Sure.
pumping. He's got to look at his biceps.
Right.
He's doing curls for the girls in the gym. Barlow and Bivens leave for a minute, and he puts his head down and he sobs, and then he stops crying, and the detectives return with a blanket so he can wrap himself up.
Right.
But he doesn't wrap it around himself. He puts it in front of him, across his shoulders. He's hiding his arms.
Right.
The arms with the scratches?
Yeah. Yeah.
Detective Barlow asks a few casual introductory questions about being a Marine. Chris answers him.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of dazed. He's very submissive. They ask about his morning. He says, I got up at 5:30. I went to the bathroom. I got dressed and I left. And as I drove away, quote, I called Sheri to wake her up to get her going. And she didn't answer, of course, end quote. He stops himself short and then he resumes again, quote, "So I went on to the gym. I called her again on the way back and she didn't respond. So that's when I called you," end quote.
Okay.
Chris tells the detectives that he was home the day before. He actually called in sick. He ran a couple of errands, picked up the kids from school, quote, "played catch with Garrett and waited on Sheri to get home. She got off work at 4 and then she actually made dinner. Pasta and chicken, and she cut up some kind of pizza. She mixed it all together," end quote.
So was he trying to imply that she never did anything?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
She actually made dinner. Yeah.
What a scumbag.
After dinner, he tells them that they all walked up to the snow cone stand. Then Chris played catch with Gavin. Quote, "I went to Zach's gym and then I came back and helped put the kids to bed," end quote. So he went to the gym the night before too, and that morning.
Okay.
While Sheri put steroid cream on Gavin's poison ivy, Chris listened to Garrett's prayers. Then he says he and Sheri watched TV and, quote, "she fell asleep in my arms on the couch," end quote.
What a good guy.
She fell asleep in my arms. She actually made dinner.
I'm such
and
a
then
victim.
she fell asleep in my arms.
I'm the victim here.
Ugh, don't get me started. Detective Barlow asks Chris about the scratches and the red marks on his arm.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what he says, quote, "I think it was when the gurney in the ambulance, I was hitting the pillow," end quote. When was the last time a pillow gave you long scratches up your arms?
Well, I wake up every morning and I have pillow scratches.
I beat him while he's asleep, y'all. Only when he snores.
Yeah,
no,
it's
I
true.
don't even beat him then. But I do wake him up and tell him to roll over.
Or if I'm not breathing.
Or if you're not breathing. Honey, you're not breathing. I don't think you're breathing. That's the one that it worries me. You're gonna get emails about getting a whatever it is for sleep apnea.
Yeah.
Someone's gonna tell you need one of those big masks that you wear.
I don't have sleep apnea.
He just doesn't breathe.
Yeah. Yeah. I just get tired during the night.
Okay. Chris talks to these officers. He speaks with pride about his job as Joyce Meyer's bodyguard. Quote, "She's on TV in 37 languages in 3/4 of the world," end quote. Then he tells him about the security surveillance company he started, Executive Innovations. What does that make you think of?
The hitman's bodyguard.
Prestige worldwide. Why?
No, I was thinking Prestige Worldwide.
Yeah. Prestige worldwide.
Yeah. He fails to mention his own security camera on the home, which might have recorded an intruder.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you want to start an executive security company,
Right.
why wouldn't, and your family has been murdered and you want this person caught, why wouldn't you first tell the police,
Yeah.
I have security cameras. We're
Yeah.
going to be able to see this guy get in through this window, right?
Yep.
But he doesn't tell them anything about it. They find it when they're searching the house. And then they come in and they question him about it. Dude, you had a surveillance.
Oh, that's right.
You got
Yeah,
cameras.
I forgot about that.
Meanwhile, back at the house, the CSI team, they've assembled. They're getting every shred of evidence out of that house, including the bodies of Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin. And part of that evidence, they've taken Chris's laptop computer, the one he used for work.
Okay.
And while Chris is sitting in that interrogation room with his blanket covering his scratches and his gym clothes, what do you think they find?
I'm going to say maybe a few torrid letters.
A treasure trove of texts, emails, and videos exchanged between him and Tara Lentz, Sheri's best friend from high school.
Wow.
Detective Barlow and Detective Bivens are taking turns. They're like coming in and leaving the room to get information. They don't want anybody knocking on the door to stop Chris from maybe talking. So they act like they're going in and out of the room, like maybe to get coffee or go to the bathroom. But what they're doing is they're getting the more information from the major case squad.
And it's at this point, things are really going to get bad for Chris.
I didn't even have to foreshadow it
No,
for you.
not at all.
They ask Chris, is anybody else besides your wife? Anything going on?
Yeah.
Anything on your phone that might make us suspicious or anybody else suspicious? You've been seeing anybody outside of your marriage?
Right.
And Chris says, quote, what do you mean? End quote.
That's always a dead giveaway.
And the detectives say, in a romantic way, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
And he replies, no. End quote. No.
Oh, wow.
He's pretty adamant after that he's not having a relationship with another woman. But then he says, quote, Tara in Florida that you guys are going to talk to, I talked to her a ton lately, but end quote.
You know, it's funny. I watch these cop shows because I love cop shows. And you can always tell when somebody's lying because when they ask them, they'll interrogate them and ask them questions, they answer. But when they hit them with something that, they know that they're guilty of, they'll either do one of two things. They'll say, what, huh? Or they'll repeat the question, what, me?
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
Cracks me up.
So after he's said, you're probably going to find out about Tara. And they're like, Tara? Who's Tara? But they already know all about Tara. And when I say all about, I mean all about.
They know bra and panty size.
They know more than that. When they have all the information on her, the St. Pete Police Department is contacted, and a detective, Shannon Halstead, goes to Tara's home, knocks on the door.
Yeah.
This is all happening while Chris is sitting in the interrogation room.
Wow.
Chris tells police that he met Tara through his wife. Tara and Sheri are best friends at Largo High School in Florida.
Right.
They even looked alike. They were pretty with dark hair. They both had thin, muscular builds. And Chris tells detectives Tara's personality was, quote, the same as Sheri's. She's never pushy about anything.
Oh, okay. Well, Tara, didn't she give him a May 4th ultimatum?
She did.
Yeah.
And Chris told Joyce Meyer that Sheri was too controlling.
Chris is all over the place.
Yes. He tells the detectives that maybe there was a little sexy phone flirtation, but not an affair.
Yeah.
Quote, I wouldn't do that to my kids. I've seen too many divorces and stuff, end quote. He says he saw Tara at a Joyce Meyer conference in Florida, but doesn't mention that she joined him at more conferences in Arizona and Hawaii.
Yeah.
And when they ask him if he'd ever thought about divorce, quote, we talked about it a while back, about possibly maybe splitting up or something, It never happened, obviously, end quote. He tells the detectives they got counseling and, quote, things have been going awesome, end quote. So he's ready to play the poor, mourning widower.
Sure.
When they ask about their financial situation, he says, quote, I make over $100,000 a year. She don't have to work, but she enjoys it, so I let her work, end quote.
What a nice guy.
So instead of talking about how far in debt they were and that he was angry about it, he tells police about a trip they're planning to take to Disneyland. But folks, Chris canceled that trip. He canceled it and booked a cruise to the Virgin Islands with Tara instead, even before Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin are murdered.
Wow. Do the police have that info?
They're going to get it.
Okay. All right.
Detective Barlow draws on Chris's faith, and he goes to him and says, quote, believing in what we believe in, knowing we can be forgiven for the sins that we do, what do you think should happen to whoever did this, end quote. And Chris hesitates before he tells him, quote, he should be put away, end quote. And then Detective Barlow asks, quote, is there any way you think this person who did this maybe has an explanation, end quote? And Chris replies, quote, I'm sure they have an explanation, end quote. And at this point, Detective Bivens takes over and says, quote, do you think you've been 100% honest with us, end quote? The good cop is gone. The bad cop has shown up.
Yep.
Do you think you've been 100% honest with us?
Right.
And Chris tells them, quote, yeah, I did my best with it, end quote.
Okay.
Is that a yes or an I did my best?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But more and more information is starting to come in, including the approximate time of death of his wife and children. And they're thinking it was in the middle of the night.
Mm.
But still, Chris insists that Sheri was alive when he left home that morning for the gym. So they lean on him a little harder about the fact that Sheri was alive when he left. And Detective Bivens asks, quote, "What would you say if I told you I don't think she was?" End quote. And Chris gets upset and says, quote, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think she was. She was. She was laying right beside me, end quote.
Chris, you're not doing yourself any favors, pal.
And when they ask him if he believes that they have the resources to determine the time of death, you think we could figure out the time of death? Chris tells him that he knows. Oh, I know you do. Because I've seen it on TV all the time. Well, this isn't an episode of Bones, Chris, okay?
Yep.
This isn't Detective Bosch.
Yep.
Detectives Bivens and Barlow, they walk out again. Chris is really restless in the room alone. He's like pacing, and then he picks up Detective Bivens's notepad. He turns one page back, and he reads what's been written there. Now, later, Detective Bivens is going to say, I didn't do it on purpose, but it really worked well in this situation, and I'm going to leave all my notes behind in the interrogation room from now on.
There you go.
So Chris is already back in his chair when the detectives return, and Detective Bivens asks, quote, so you're saying some madman sat in the shadows and watched for you to leave and then entered the house, end quote. And Chris says, quote, that's the only thing I can assume. And then these two detectives get up and leave again. And Chris starts sniffling and sobbing, and he's shaky. But what's important to note through this entire interview, through all of this, Chris never asks what happened to Sheri, Gavin, and Garrett.
Wow.
He never wants to know how they died, what happened to them, what they found inside the house. Were they strangled? Were they shot? Were they stabbed to death?
You'd think he'd want to know something about it.
Well, these are his children.
Yeah.
Didn't he want to know how they died? If they suffered.
Right.
That's the thing. People always want to know, did he suffer?
Right.
Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, Florida, Detective Shannon Halstead is thinking that her visit to Tara Lentz is just going to be like a routine, hey, here's the situation. But when she knocks on Tara Lentz's door, Tara just spills the beans. She's singing like a canary.
Wow.
Tara wanted absolutely nothing to do with the death of her high school best friend and her two sons.
Sure.
Tara willingly gives Detective Halstead her BlackBerry and her computer. It's like, here, just take these.
Leave me out of this.
And there are lots of files, videos, and emails all about their relationship. And Detective Halstead calls the station in Columbia, Illinois, and tells the detectives, quote, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure this is his girlfriend, end quote.
Yep.
There are photos of them together and photos of them kissing and sex tapes, which we'll get into a little bit later. They started seeing each other in the fall of 2008, 6 months before Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin are murdered. She tells Detective Halstead that Chris would fly her to meet him at locations where he was working for Joyce Meyer. And she mentions that they had been to Hawaii together. And police start pulling records from the car rental place. And they found the car rentals, the receipts, from all of their trips together.
Wow.
His neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, questions Chris, who's still sitting in this interrogation room. And when he specifically tells him they have receipts, literally and figuratively,
right.
Chris says, quote, well, I didn't think it was an affair, end quote. What?
Oh, man.
And when they question that, he says, quote, no, an affair is when you're like living with them and you're going to get married and everything, end quote. Really, Chris? Really?
Yeah. Yep.
But while he's sitting in this interrogation room sobbing and crying and answering questions, He's texting Tara. She even gets a text from him while she's being questioned by Detective Halstead that says, "I'm okay."
What a moron.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But what the police have right now, it's all circumstantial. There's no evidence of Chris using red spray paint. There's nothing on his hands. And after leaving all those messages on the walls, you'd think there was something. Nada. But they do ask him to leave a sample of his handwriting so they can compare it to what's painted on the walls of the house. After 6 hours of questioning, they don't have enough to charge Chris Coleman. They can't charge him with diddly squat.
Right.
So he walks out of the police station, but they keep his phone. After the murders, Chris is acting odd. At the funeral, no one was allowed to get up and speak about the boys or Sheri. And word is starting to spread that Chris was cheating on Sheri. Now, remember, she told all her friends and people at the church what was going on.
Yeah.
Chris wants a divorce. I won't give it to him. Chris is having an affair.
Right.
If anything ever happens to me,
Well, it was Chris.
it was Chris.
Yeah.
Some of Sheri's friends put up a little memorial in the Coleman's yard for Sheri and the boys. Chris takes it all down, throws it in the trash.
Wow.
He did the same with anything that was left at the graves of Sheri or the boys.
Why would he? Oh.
And he said that Sheri wouldn't like it. So people are looking at him and they want him to be arrested.
Yeah.
And the major case squad is getting pressure to arrest somebody. We've got a woman and her 2 small children dead in this very small town.
Right.
But all the hard work done by the major case squad and the CSI team are starting to pay off. And here are some of the things that they all thought were strange.
Okay.
At the Coleman house that morning, a basement window was open. In fact, several windows in the house are unlocked. And he's a security specialist who knows that there are all these threats against his family. And he goes off, leaving his wife and children alone with open windows in the basement, and all the other windows are unlocked. There's no forced entry into this home. None. And remember the camera Justin Barlow installed in his son's window that looked right at the mailbox of the Coleman's home?
Right.
There are no strangers walking up and down the street that morning. No one, not even through the night. And what about Chris's security camera system? The recorder was missing.
Wow.
Then autopsy showed that Sheri was involved in a fight before she's murdered. She fought for her life. She had a black eye, and there's DNA under her fingernails, although it came back that it could have been Chris's, but it could have been someone else's. It's inconclusive.
Okay.
What was clear was that she'd been fighting for her life.
Right.
And there's scratches on Chris's arms when he's with the EMTs who are at the house after the murders, and he says it's from banging his fists on the gurney.
The pillows.
Yeah, which he did after he's asked about the scratches.
Right.
When he's being questioned by police, he tells them he's cold. He asks for something to wear. He's in his muscle shirt and his shorts. And police think this is an attempt to cover up the scratches on his arms. He even says, when asked if the blanket will work, he says, quote, "As long as I can cover my arms up, I'm freezing," end quote.
Okay.
Later, he's going to say that he got the scratches from removing a satellite dish from the roof of his house the day before the murders.
Okay. All right.
Now, according to police and CSI, there wasn't any DNA at the scene that didn't belong there, meaning there wasn't anyone from outside the family in the house.
Right.
But Chris's phone and computer are filled with these photos and texts and sex videos. In his online calendar, quote, "The day Tara changed my life, 11/5/08, end quote. Just to remind you, 9 days later, the first nasty email showed up at Chris's work.
Right.
Also in his notes on his phone, quote, "Our daughter's name, Zoe Lynn Coleman," end quote.
Jeez.
The police start digging through all the photos and videos. There are several hundred. Chris and Tara are kissing, dressed up and looking like a couple, cheek to cheek and smiling. Chris kissing Tara's cheek, Tara biting Chris's cheek. There's a naked picture of Chris in the shower that shows his junk. His genitalia. There's a photo of Chris taking a picture of himself in a mirror showing the Franken beans.
Wow.
A photo of Tara partially turned away from the camera, exposing her rear end. A picture of her breasts. There were videos of Chris that he took of himself naked for Tara with him saying things that were gross. And then there's a video of him badgering the witness in the shower for her.
Good Lord.
That's code for
Yeah.
spanking the monkey.
I got it.
Back at the Coleman house, the police are using black gel to capture footprint impressions. They've bagged all these items, including hair and fibers, a Glock pistol, a car pistol, latex gloves, any shoestring or phone cord that might have been used to strangle the victims, 2 cell phones, a BlackBerry, 2 laptop computers, and then the analysis begins. And almost immediately, they get a breakthrough.
Okay.
The threats emailed on November 14th to Joyce Meyer, her son, Danny Meyer, and her bodyguard, Chris Coleman, were sent from Chris Coleman's laptop.
Yep.
They came from destroychris@gmail.com, an email account created the same evening on the same laptop, November 14th.
Wow.
And Chris's work files contained the same misspelling, opportunities, spelled with a U and not an O.
Wow.
Funny thing, Sheri was the one who pointed this out to the police in one of the threatening letters.
Ah.
Spelling matters, people.
Yep.
Have you watched The Jinx? You got to learn how to spell Beverly Hills. But the team still has no paint can, no paint, spattered clothing, no murder weapon. They review Chris's behavior in the morning of May 5th. He made his first call to Sheri at 5:45 a.m. just as he's pulling away from their home. He said he was calling to wake her. Well, why not just touch her on the shoulder when he leaves?
Yeah.
They found zero pattern to suggest that he ever routinely called her in the morning on his way to the gym to wake her up. Because, you can see patterns in people's phone calls.
Right.
Chris texted home while he did his cardio, quote, "Are you awake? I know you was tired last night," end quote. "I have about 5 minutes left on cardio, then I'll be home. Hello, you up? Time to get the kids up." He told the police he was worried when she didn't answer, yet he did another 15 minutes at the gym when his first 20 minutes were up. He called Detective Barlow when he was 5 minutes from home. Then, according to an AT&T cell tower expert, he drove past his exit and was north of his home when he made his next call to Detective Barlow. And by the time he reached home, police officers were discovering his dead family. He wanted them to get there before him.
Yep.
They'd gone through Chris's credit card receipts, and one stood out. Weeks before the murders, Chris had a charge to the handyman hardware store for $3.70.
Gee, let me think what costs $3.70 at a hardware store. Could it be a can of paint?
They call the hardware store, and they pull up the transaction, and guess what?
Little
12-ounce
paint.
can of spray paint.
Yep.
Candy apple red.
Whoa.
Then more evidence comes in. Handwriting experts say that the writing on the walls matched the handwriting samples that Chris had given them. And most damning of all, everyone who'd worked on the autopsies of all 3, Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin, said the time of death was earlier than 6 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
The time when the murders would have had to have occurred while Chris was at the gym, not to mention that the surveillance camera in Detective Jason Barlow's home showed absolutely nothing.
Right.
Nobody.
Yeah.
But they were going to focus on the time of death, and the team calls in the best of the best. Dr. Michael Bodden, the New York forensic pathologist.
We love this guy.
Yeah, he's on HBO's Autopsy.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who consulted on the death of Martin Luther King Jr., JFK Jr., John Belushi. And in Dr. Bodden's opinion, based on the autopsy, Sheri and the boys were likely killed around 3 a.m. Definitely before 5 a.m.
Right.
And probably very much closer to 3 a.m.
Right.
Chris Coleman is finally arrested and charged with murder 1 for the deaths of Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin. Now, his family to this day says that Chris is innocent. Chris to this day says that he is innocent, even though all the evidence shows that he had motive and that the threatening emails came from him, and that he had purchased the candy apple red spray paint, and the handwriting is a match.
Yeah.
So when they say that these bodies, when they were killed at 3 a.m, how or why would this killer spare Chris's life?
Right. And how would he not wake up when
his wife is being
strangled?
Not just strangled, but punched in the face?
Yeah. Well, Chris is a heavy sleeper.
Apparently.
He has apnea.
He is picked up and held without bail. In the spring, did you say he has apnea?
Yeah.
I'm a little slow today. In the spring of 2011, pretrial hearings start, and the defense doesn't want the prosecution to allow their expert, Robert Leonard, to take the stand, because Robert is head of the graduate program in forensic linguistics at Hofstra University. He has compared the threat emails and letters to a database compiled by the FBI's behavioral unit at Quantico, Virginia. He's their forensic computer specialist for the FBI in Quantico.
Okay.
And he said, quote, of over 4,400 documents, only 18 began with you, and of those, only 8 contain threats. The others are rants, end quote. And he also points out quirks in the threat emails and the letters that appear in Chris's other writings, like misplacing apostrophes in his everyday writing. Won't, don't, doesn't. He puts the apostrophe at the end instead of in between the N and the T for the contraction.
Wow. So this guy's not a genius is what we're
I
trying
said
to say.
that, yeah. He also has a tendency to fuse words, to put words together that aren't supposed to. Good time is one word. Yeah, have a good time. And set up. Set up some security, SETUP, all one word.
Right.
One of Sheri's friends testifies in pretrial, quoting Sheri. Chris told Sheri that she had ruined his life, quote, and he can't believe that he can't get away from her and he can't divorce her, end quote. The same friend testifies that Chris would lose his job with Joyce Meyer Ministries if he got divorced, and she testifies that Sheri told her Chris had physically beaten her. So remember when I said, that sounds like somebody who feels threatened?
Right.
She confides in her friend that he had beaten her.
Wow.
There's a text that Sheri sent to Vincent Hall, a staff pastor at their church, the day after Christmas. Quote, I'm not getting the whole story. He told me he's leaving because of his job, but if Joyce finds out, she will fire him, end quote. Now, this trial begins on Monday, April 25th, 2011. Bill Margulies is representing Chris Coleman. Both families are in the courtroom. I can't imagine what that was like.
Yeah.
The prosecution shows photos of the dead bodies, including the 2 little boys, of the ligature marks around their necks, the black eye on Sheri. Dr. Bodden says that it's direct trauma. Somebody punched her either right before or right after she is strangled. And Sheri was killed first because Garrett, who was killed second, has strands of his mother's hair on his body. Dr. Bodden tells the jury that each ligature would have had to have been held tight for 4 to 5 minutes. 4 to 5 minutes while they struggle.
Man.
And this is his family.
How could you do that?
Dr. Bodden reiterates with lengthy explanation his estimate of time of death is before 5 a.m. and probably closer to 3 a.m. Prosecution asks whether there's any chance the murders could have happened after Chris left for the gym. And Dr. Bodden said, quote, this isn't even a close call. They had to have been dead before he left the house, end quote.
Wow, wow.
Then Joyce Meyer takes the stand in a videotaped deposition, stating that in April of 2009, Chris, quote, wasn't as attentive to his duties, he was forgetting things. And, quote, on May 4th, the day before the murders, he called and told me he wasn't feeling good and asked if he could take the day off. I didn't remember him ever calling me and saying he didn't feel good and wanted to take off, end quote. Joyce Meyer had also noticed that he had a second phone and she thought it was hinky. She didn't say it was hinky, but she thought it was weird. She thought it was odd.
Right.
And she said that Chris would not have lost his job over divorce, There were lots of people on her staff that were divorced, but the immorality of an affair, that was something entirely different.
Yep.
And he could have been dismissed for that.
Sure.
Then Tara Lentz took the stand. She tells the court that Chris professed his love for her, quote, all the time, constantly, end quote. She told the court about being in Hawaii with him in mid-April and says Chris promised to present Sheri with divorce papers on May 4th. Then he said there'd been a typo in the divorce papers, so he would do it on May 5th. May 5th, the day of the murders.
Wow.
On a little side note, Tara was wearing the promise ring that Chris gave her in the courtroom that day.
Are you serious?
Totally serious. He had one too. They were matching black bands. They wore them together whenever they were together.
I guess she didn't want to distance herself too far.
I don't know. Maybe that was her secret way of saying that she still cared about him. Who knows?
Wow.
When the prosecution rests, defense-only argument is that it's all circumstantial and that there's nothing so much as a jaywalking ticket attributed to Chris Coleman. They have no murder weapon. And, quote, the state was not able to recover a speck of paint from Chris Coleman, end quote. The defense insists that the family could have died after Chris left the house, and he tells the jury the state never established where Chris Coleman's laptop was when the threats were sent. They contend that anybody could have set up that email and written those texts from Chris's laptop, or those emails from Chris's laptop.
You know, I guess if that's all you've got, what are you going to do? You got to come up with something.
The prosecution declares, quote, this investigation isn't over, end quote. Well, seems pretty clear-cut to me.
Yeah.
Chris never took the stand. Now, the jury goes in to deliberate, and according to one juror, the first time they voted, it was 7-5, not guilty.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa.
But then one of them picked up a photo that they had in the jury room, a photo of Chris and Tara, and it was dated October. Remember in the beginning I said, I think it started earlier than November, even though they say the official start of the affair was November.
Right.
It was dated October. I think that date in November where he said his life was changed was maybe when she slept with him or they became official.
Sure.
So they see this photo of Chris and Tara dated October, 2 months before Tara said their affair had started, 2 months before Chris said that their affair had started.
Right.
And because of this, the jury thought, if Chris is lying about this one little thing, why lie about when it started?
Right.
If he's lying about this one little thing in light of all the evidence that is stacked against him, he's lying about everything.
Sure.
15 hours of deliberation later, and the verdict was delivered on the 2-year anniversary of the murders of Sheri, Gavin, and Garrett on May 5th, 2011. Guilty, murder 1, all 3 counts.
Yep.
Chris decided to dismiss the jury for sentencing, leaving it in the hand of the judge. And at sentencing, he gets life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 life sentences to run consecutively.
Good.
Now, while he has been in prison, Chris has been a model prisoner. He has had several appeals, none of which have changed anything for him. To this very day, Chris says he's innocent. To this day, Chris's parents say he's innocent, and that he ran into Tara's arms because Sheri wasn't being respectful as a wife, and any man who didn't get respect from his wife would go someplace else to find it.
Nice try.
What?
Nice try.
Seriously?
Yeah.
What? I thought it was by the book with you people.
Yeah.
What about thou shalt not commit adultery?
Yep.
There is a Facebook group that believes that Chris is innocent. And again, I will link to that in the show notes. But their idea is that Edward Edwards murdered Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin. And there are people who believe that Edward Edwards killed lots of people that others have taken the blame for and is responsible for lots of unsolved crimes as well.
So Edward Edwards got his laptop and sent the emails. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know.
All right.
I know, right?
Okay.
But that is the tragic story of Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman and their father, Chris. And that's all I have to say about that.
You know, what's amazing to me is how anyone could just be so cold-hearted and just have no soul, basically, to kill their own family.
I mean, he's not the first one, he's one of the earlier ones where they just off the entire family so they can be with their lover.
Right.
What are these people thinking?
I don't know.
These are your flesh and blood. It's your children.
Your children.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there are a lot of people who think that Chris is innocent. Please don't email me. I'm going to link to your Facebook group. People can go look at that as well. I'm just presenting the case from the evidence.
Yeah.
Everybody has a strong opinion about this. The thing that's important to me, is that Sheri and Gavin and Garrett lost their lives. But I will put a link to the Chris Coleman is Innocent Facebook page if you want to go check that out.
Cool. All right, well, let's move on, shall we?
Please, let's move on.
Let's do a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right, number 1 this week, I'm calling rodent rage. A pair of disgruntled bar patrons in western Pennsylvania showed their displeasure by tossing a groundhog and a grouse into the tavern.
Okay, just for clarification, a grouse is a bird, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the animals were dead. Okay.
They're dead.
Yes.
Don't drive angry.
Oh, so it's not like the cute one driving the truck in Groundhog Day. Okay.
No, they're dead. Brookville Police Chief Ken Dwarick, I hope I pronounced that correctly, told the Associated Press that the suspects were angry after getting thrown out of Bill's bar because one was drunk and the other was underage.
We'll show you.
Yeah, now here's the kicker. Quote, "The use of animals is fairly common in Brookville," Dwarick said.
When you're disgruntled, you just throw a dead carcass in a bar?
A guy will get in an argument, he said, and put a dead squirrel on his girlfriend's doorknob, that kind of thing.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, the two were charged.
What state is this again?
In Pennsylvania.
Oh, Lord, have mercy, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, number 2. I misspoke.
I misspoke? I'm really trying to pick up on all your little cute titles because I feel like I miss them sometimes.
No, you'll get it.
Okay.
A traveler was stopped at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York after he mentioned that he had a bomb in his luggage. Yeah.
Don't say the word bomb at the airport.
Exactly. A Transportation Security Administration officer, say that 10 times fast, overheard Jason Cruz, 29, tell a friend that he had the wrong kind of bomb, reports the New York Post.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, officials took Cruz into a holding room where authorities learned that Cruz was referring to a deli sandwich called the bomb. The TSA, that one even made me laugh. The TSA agent who reported the bomb comment explained that she only caught a snippet of the conversation. Cruz was released, but not in time to make his flight.
Oh.
So, important safety tip. When traveling in an airport, don't talk about your food that's called a bomb.
I feel so sorry. That's something that would happen to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Ugh.
All right, number 3, and finally, a hot cup of stupid.
A hot cup of stupid.
An Alabama man who walked into a Starbucks to supposedly rob the business ended up with nothing but a cup of coffee and a stay in jail. According to the Huntsville Times, Philip Sauday demanded all the cash from the store. Now, the barista said she was unable to open the cash drawer, but offered Sauday a cup of coffee instead. Sauday took the hot beverage and left the store. Police found him nearby and arrested him on robbery charge.
Employee of the month right there.
Exactly.
I'm not going to give you anything. Just that about a cup of coffee. That
Yeah.
must have been a really good
Yeah.
cup of coffee for him just to walk away, for him to second guess what he was doing.
Yeah, but here's a tall white latte for you. Be on your way. So there you go.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, all you got to do is go to hitchtohomicide.com where there's a pull-down menu.
Yep.
And while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us your own true crime story.
Please do.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitch to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.